So it would be great for me just to hear what just came out of that conversation that was surprising. That was like just to hear some of the themes here would be really helpful for me, just for all of us to get a sense of what it is that we're learning, isn't it?
So we're interested in a couple things. One is how do you get leadership to be on board, especially in a place like Chicago where it seems like it would be a real threat to their legitimacy.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, what are some specific stuff, like specific creative processes that you use? You mentioned musicians. What do you do with musicians in the planning process?
Okay, cool. Anything else? Just throw them out there. This is great.
I think just to build on that, we sort of had that first issue also, but then we talked about it's not just getting the political leadership on board, but it's also making sure that transitions to the next elected official. What happens with that institutional knowledge with the political cycle? Do people wanting to bring out their own ideas and business
agendas?
If I could just jump in, maybe what's the stance vis-a-vis power? How does the process look at power? Does it acknowledge power? Does it factor that in some fashion?
Super.
Where and how does education, the whole education system fit into all this?
Woohoo! I wish it did more.
Don't we all?
Yeah.
So what happens when people come, it's not about the leadership, people come to the meetings and they have deep commitments already fixed to the issue, and they're going to win.
Wicked. You encounter that a lot. Brilliant.
They're all right.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Already got it figured out. I'm not turning up for a conversation. I'm turning up to tell you how it's going to be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not top down.
No, that's citizens. That's citizens turning up that way. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, brilliant.
We mainly talked about the power of dialogue. I teach civic engagement, and I'm just thinking about my students and how they connect with that idea that dialogue is a way to build community.
Right.
And Cecile was talking about a circle of hope model that she's seen, where people begin by talking about building their own personal path, but that ends up becoming collective and communal.
Right.
So we're really interested.
That's almost into the detail of like an event design. Like, what's the process that you move people through to actually? I love that. Yep. Okay. Anything else that cooked up that hasn't been spoken already, or?
We talked about keeping up the stamina of the public, because we talked about how cast our vote and that's the end of it, but rather having them follow through and say no, it's something you want to see.
Yeah, totally. I went to see when I was in Halifax. I've loved Billy Bragg as a musician since I was like 12 years old. I don't know if any of you guys know him. And he's like one of those mentors you never meet. And I went to see him play. And when you see Billy Bragg play in England, like the whole audience gets involved and they're like echoing him and like he's responding, and it's just really fun kind of like community atmosphere. And I went to see him in Halifax, and like he'd sing a song and everybody would just like clap politely. And then, and then he would just start saying more and more outrageous things to try and get a reaction from the audience. Everybody was like, very, very clap politely. And then eventually he's like, right, we got a choice. We got a choice between a Bob Dylan song and a Carpenter song. We're going to do some audience participation. And he threw up the lights in the auditorium. And then the Carpenters song won. And he was like, predictable but okay. So he's singing the Carpenters song, and then he gets to the chorus, and then he stops playing, and he wants the audience to be singing along, and there's like dead silence in the auditorium. And he goes, what? You think democracy is just about voting? And then you don't get to participate after that? He's like, and then he stops and he plays the Bob Dylan song. So like I get it, it's like that's for real, isn't it? It's just like that's just one of the means. These are the big questions right at the heart of all of this work. But is anything else that kind of hasn't been covered, or is just like yes?
One more thing, we didn't actually talk about this, but it just occurred to me. How do you ensure that these processes don't replicate racial divisions and Right.
I only know something about that because I've been part of doing that.
Okay.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So, I think what I can do, I think I can still present these slides, but I can just put emphasis on some things and move really swiftly through other things. I think that's probably the way to go. I invite you, if I'm talking too much about something, to be like, move on! you know? Like, feel free to like tell me to move on, or feel free to like interrupt me and be like, what? Like, you said that statement, and like, what do you mean by that? Like, don't feel you can't like interrupt to get more information or move me on if you just kind of got it and I'm yabbering on. I really care about it. So when I'm sitting down with when I'm meeting with senior decision makers within a city or within a large system, like we did some very large engagement, 5 years of work in the public health system of Nova Scotia to shift the public health system. This is how we talk about the engagement piece. What I say, like a highly responsive and participatory interface, blah blah blah. And the bottom line of this is that all this is about filling the gap between those who make decisions and those who are impacted by them. And enabling the information to flow effectively, usefully, meaningfully across that gap. That's what we're doing, And what that also enables me to do is to position myself in between, right? So when I'm contracting, like I have, so on the Nova Center, which was this $500 million development that went in downtown, I had 3 clients named on my contract. One was the developer, one was the province of Nova Scotia, and the other was the public, right? So that, like, I was contractually responsible to all 3 of those. So in our work, we make a distinction between who's the sponsor and who's the client. Yeah? And so, and it's as soon as we're placed in a position where we are advocating for somebody or somebody, we no longer have the capacity to host the conversation. It's gone, right? So this is just a way of us talking about it. And the reason kind of decision makers are going for it, someone was asking about this, but the reason decision makers are going for it is because they're coming out of it looking good. That's why. And the first project that we did, the library, there was such a level of surprise around the fact that the governmental, the public library staff, the province, all the politicians were like, whoa, look, we look great, And so, like, that's part of what's going on. Is that at least in our area of the world, decision makers are beginning to discover that the integration of the people who are most affected into the design of whatever it is that you're part of actually makes you popular. Actually makes you popular. Right? So that's part of it. And I know, when we first did the libraries process, there was this fella, and we were, I did this kind of like thing where I went around the table, and it was like a table, this many people maybe, and I went around and said, what are you excited about, and what's your role in the project? And we went around and got to Phil Townsend, who has since become a good friend of mine. He was in charge of infrastructure for the whole city at the time. And he said, come on, we all got to be honest, like, public engagement is basically a huge pain in the ass, right? And like, everyone's like, yeah, And then he said, my job is to like he points at me, hold your feet to the fire around doing a good job, And then by the end of I finished my presentation of what we were planning to do with like street engagement and then a huge online campaign and a whole series of events, and like he had gone like completely pale. And it was like, well, and then I was just like, who's holding whose feet to the fire, buddy, So there was a lot of like worry really early on, but the more they were actually able to see it deliver, like the more credibility it built, and then the more trust decision makers begin to start putting in the process, and the more trust they put in the process, the more they're willing to let go of control, And the tough thing for decision makers is you're basically saying, let go of control, but remain accountable. It's a tough ask. It's a tough ask, And you're also saying, okay, and we need you to, at the very beginning of this process, say that you're going to support the outcomes of it without knowing what they are ahead of time. Right? But what you do get to do is set the parameters for the engagement. You get to very clearly articulate the non-negotiables. What can we not change, and what can we change and influence? And like a huge amount of our prep work is doing that. It's like working with all of these folks around. Let's very clearly articulate what we can change and what we can't. And we talked a lot about this at the Art of Hosting for the last 3 days, of like, the white lines on the soccer pitch are what make it a good game. Before there were white lines, like whole villages used to go to war over a pig's bladder, right? So that, the drawing of the white lines is what makes it a good game. So if you can clearly articulate what people can't change and what they can change, then you can actually start running an engagement that feels meaningful to people. Does that make sense? So this is what I say to them, and then this is like my secret agenda. which is that essentially what civic engagement does when it's done well is it begins to start transferring power and directionality into the hands of the people who are most affected. Like, you know, my vision is that if we are working with civic engagement in powerful and meaningful ways, the directionality of society begins to start being in the hands of the citizens rather than being centralized. And so we're working on a project now in Nova Scotia where we're doing engagements both regionally and also provincially, and it's kind of like they're trying to rewrite the narrative of the province. And so we're able to go into Yarmouth County in southwest Nova Scotia and have conversations around what's working well, where would you like us to be in 20 years when our $26 billion shipbuilding contract runs out, right? Because then our economy is going to tank, right? And what are the next steps that we need to take to get there? And if we can surface those things and make them visible in a coherent way that reflects public opinion, we just gave all the politicians in that area their platform. You see what I'm saying? And so and then you can do that at a provincial level. So for me, if we're doing this work well, we have an opportunity to begin to really start fundamentally shifting where the directionality of society lies. And it just starts by, my experience has been, like this library project turned up. And suddenly we were doing that, and that went really well. And then suddenly we're in the next big scale of project, and suddenly we're in the next big scale of project. That the work, at whatever scale you started, if you're doing a good job, generates the next level of it. You know? But this is the kind of long-term vision that drives me, and drives the work, and drives everything we're doing. Yeah. All right. So some of the principles here, and this is going to speak to some of the kind of some of the kind of more almost like philosophical questions around it. And these are like the filters through which we make decisions around our engagements. And all of these slides are online, by the way, so I can send you a link, you can get all these slides, there's no IP on it, please make the talk, record it, tell it your own way, this is nothing here should be held close, right? That's the bottom line for me. And it's just our latest learning, you know, so please, whatever you discover, share. So, whatever we're doing has to build trust. Whatever we're doing in our engagement has to build trust. If it doesn't build trust, we shouldn't do it. What we're dealing with here is a fundamental breakdown of trust. That's what civic engagement has the opportunity to heal in our societies, right? So when we were, and I told this story the other day with the libraries project, we did our first major engagement. We had 250 people turn up in the room. We had 750 people watching it online through the Ustream and engaging through chat rooms. We were feeding all of that into the conversations. We had done a whole load of creative engagement across the community. We had I'll show you pictures later, we had pumpkin people because it was near Halloween. We had pumpkin people with invites on them, a huge, a collective of knitters had done yarn bombing in the city, and so all these things. So we've got these people there. Yarn bombing. Yarn bombing is totally worth exploring. Who knew it that knitters could lead change? So yeah, so basically knitters get together and they create things, and then they'll yarn bomb sites. So in our case, on the site where the library was going to be, there was this beautiful old tree, and they completely wrapped this tree in this hand-knitted blanket that they'd sat up all night doing, and then they hung invitations for the event off to it, and people were able to feed information in there. They were able to give information out and collect information at that site, and it came from the community, right? It was people volunteered to do it, and so yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a Chicago version. Maybe it's not knitting, maybe it's something else. What is it? Spray painting. Yeah, so graffiti art is also an awesome way of doing this. Graffiti art is a fantastic way of getting information out, you know. You look at the kind of art of someone like Banksy from the UK who's taken graffiti art, and, you know, people now are like, no, don't scrub that off. Right? Because he's providing social commentary and providing conversation through the art he's creating, right? So in this situation, we did our first event, we had all these people there, it was all about the vision and principles for the building. And the public bar was really high. They wanted this curvy, organic, awesome building with a tree going up through the middle, and it was just whoa, we've already got $55 million, you know? And so the architect basically went away and was completely why did we do public engagement? And the communications people from the government were oh my God, how are we going to position this? And so all of that was going on. And then we just came back and it was well, we just have to tell people the truth. The next event, we just turn up and be there's no way we can do what you asked for $55 million. But we heard you say this, we heard you say these things. Boom, 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 boom. but there's no way we can deliver on all of that with $55 million. But as an architect, here's what your inspiration gave me in terms of my first drawings of a design. Bang, up on the screen. You know, and the honesty and transparency of that immediately built trust and credibility into our process. And the fact that he came back with something that looked awesome, even though it was still kind of square and chunky, you know, and then someone in the room shouted out, "It looks like a pile of books," you know, and I was like, oh yeah, it does, he hadn't even thought about it, right? So there was something about that capacity, and like, you know, I sat down with the communications people in the government, and I had to like talk them through, like, no, you don't need to manipulate or create any messaging here, other than the truth of the situation. So whatever we do has to build trust, right? I'm going to spend too long on these. Makes visible the full spectrum of opinion and perspective. So, like, even people who hate it need to be heard. Especially, the job of someone who's running a civic engagement process is not to sell the building. The job of someone who's running a civic engagement process is to gather authentic reflection of the diversity of public opinion so that that can influence how decisions get made. Right? As soon as you are positioning for the building to go ahead or not, like, you don't have, again, I'll say, you don't have the credibility to call the conversation. Right? So the job of anyone running any kind of engagement is to make visible the full spectrum of opinion and perspective. And sometimes, like, people are just really mad. On the Nova Center project, all the negotiations have happened for 2 years behind closed doors, you know? People were so mad, right? And like, designs had gone through, there'd been no public input. So like, the first thing we did for a public engagement was, and we never normally do this because I'm not actually that interested in individual voice, I'm interested in public opinion. We stuck a mic in the middle of the room, we had concentric circles, we had a local indigenous elder come in and like open it like a circle. And then people got 3 minutes on the mic each, and we did it in, you know, 3 30-minute blocks, right? And then people just got to rant. They just got to like be like, "Ah, you haven't listened to us for 2 years. This is bullshit. It's the same old, like all it just like people just got to deliver, you know." And we hadn't given space for people to rant right at the beginning. There's no way that we could have got into the strategic conversation later about what do we want this building to look like. How could this building interact with our city in a healthy and whole kind of way, right? And so there was something about like making space for the ranters. Again, rather than trying to manipulate them, avoid them, it's almost like, yeah. And then the other thing that happens here, and this is also the fear of decision makers, is that those people are going to completely co-opt an engagement process. You know, and so if all of your focus is on avoiding a particular group of people, rather than engaging as broad a demographic as possible, then you just make your target really small. You know, but the broader the engagement is, the less any singular perspective has. All right? So it's like, that's the purpose. Like, we have to do large-scale, broad engagement if we actually want to avoid any building or any development or any piece of programming or whatever being co-opted by one perspective. Right? And so often there's this fear around engagement from decision makers, and my answer is actually, the broader you go, the safer you are in terms of attack. Yeah. Kind of talk through that. This is kind of going in this. So when we did the Nova Center project, so before I kind of got into the civic engagement, a lot of the work I'd done in Nova Scotia was around was kind of like grassroots youth work with set up drop-in centres for kids who are falling through the gaps, and kind of justice and community services and education. So that had been a lot of my work. So it was a lot of kind of like grassroots community organisers that I've been working with. And so we did this big engagement around the Nova Center, which went really well. You know, the developer threw away $10 million worth of schematics so that he could design around the public. And so the building, you know, in a large reflected the public input, which was great. But, you know, I got pulled aside by a mate of mine afterwards who runs an organisation called Leave Out Violence up in Halifax. Incredible work for young people. And she was like, your rhetoric is not matching your practice. You say that you want to reach a broad demographic of people in our community, but who's turning up is the middle and upper middle class white community of our city. And she's like, and the reason for that is because that's your team. That's your team. Yeah? And so she was like, people trust invitations from people like them. That's the truth of it. you know. And so we've basically come up with this principle now for all of our engagement, is that the core team, the team of people who are leading the engagement, have to reflect the communities you're seeking to engage, or it won't, just doesn't work. Just doesn't work. The rhetoric, the visionary rhetoric does not meet the practice of the work, you know. And it was like very humbling for me, because we were being acclaimed for this process. And then some of my closest buddies like sat me down and were like, "You're off the mark, Tim Mary," you know. And so it was good teaching, you know, and key piece. And so we're now going into a major blended use development in the city of Halifax, where they're having everything from affordable housing to penthouse suites, community space, art space in this building. It's going to be very dramatic, and we're just about next week to go into pulling together a very diverse stakeholder group of 35 to 40 community members that are going to lead the engagement. And what we're doing is equipping them with the tools and capacities to lead the engagement across their community, right? And then we're giving them templates through which to be able to feed that information back in.
Where do you get your core team?
From the community that we're engaging.
Are they volunteers you like bring in?
Yeah, so we're just figuring all of this out, right? So some of them are volunteers, some of them are paid, depending on their circumstance. When we're working with young people, you know, we're nearly always paying them because they're dropping a job at Tim Hortons coffee shop to be able to be there at the planning meeting, and I've got to be able to replace your income, you know, so we're constantly navigating that on an individual basis, like how we support that. But yeah, people have to be recognised for their contribution.
Do you assemble the team, though? I think maybe is the question.
No, so the way that we're playing with it at the moment is that we're doing an initial gathering, which we're calling a foundation retreat. Let me put up a slide and I can show you if there's interest on this. And this is kind of going too well. Alright, so here's what this engagement looks like. Alright, so we pulled together our hosting team, you know, which on its own is reflective of the communities we're seeking to engage. I'm reaching out to the practitioners I know who are able to host good conversation, able to host good dialogue, and I'm saying, would you come and join this team, because we're going to be running this process, right? We then do a foundation retreat, and the foundation retreat is where we're pulling together all of the kind of people who hold influence and power around the process we're engaging in. So, for example, on this, it's called the Bloomfield development that's going in. We've got the CEO of Housing Nova Scotia, we've got some of the policy makers, we've got some of the frontline governmental staff, we've got Imagine Bloomfield, which is the community organisation that's been there for 12 years. We've got Rosie, who's on, Dennis, who's on my hosting team. His mum used to run the cafeteria in this building. It's 2 old schools that have been completely redone up and turned into this mixed development. So it's just like a huge range. We've got community members, we've got different organisations, we've got newcomers into the community. And they're trying to use the development to bring kind of like new immigrants into this area of Halifax. So we're now reaching out to ISIS, who has these relationships, into the new immigrant community. So all of the people who hold power and influence, we're bringing them together for a day. And it's like, okay, what's the purpose of this engagement? What are the non-negotiables that we need to create around it? What is it that people can actually change and influence? And who do we need to invite into our core team? Right? Who do we need to invite into our core team? So we're kind of like hitting a few birds with one stone, right? Which is like getting senior leadership. And by senior leadership, I don't mean you hold vested power in an institution. I mean people listen to you. I mean you have influence, right? You have influence in the community we are engaging. I don't care what your job is. If people listen to you, I need you at that foundation retreat. Because I need you on side with what we're doing. You need to feel like you own it. Alright? And so we're getting senior leadership with support because they feel like they own the process. They're able to very clearly articulate, multi-stakeholder group, they're very able to clearly articulate what the boundaries of engagement are, what they're able to influence, and they're able to help us find out who do we need to invite. So none of these senior leaders have the time or capacity to be running a major engagement across the city. They're all too busy, they're all doing too much already. They're up to way too much stuff, you know? So then we're saying to them, who is it from your community, from your networks, from your relationships that you would trust to invite into this? You know, we talk very clearly, like we need people who are able to learn. We need people who can absolutely bring their opinion and their soapbox, but not be attached to it as the whole picture. Right? Yeah, you have, like nobody can work in a core team to deliver an engagement if they think they've got the truth. They have to understand that their piece is a piece of the puzzle. Right? So we talk about some of the, who are the type of people we're looking for, and then that leads into a core team retreat where we bring together, we're planning to bring together something around like 60 people 25 to 30 of which we're expecting to actually commit into a core team. All right? That core team will then go out, run a whole series of engagements across the community. Some of those will be events, some of those will be conversations at dinner tables, some of those will be, kind of like in Nova Scotia, there's a huge bingo culture somehow. So like, just ears, knitting bingo. Yeah, so there's a huge bingo. You'll get 120 people every Thursday night in a room. So we don't need to organise events. We just need to go to where people are, right? So it's that. So those things, and then the red dots are kind of like, there are major events that we're going to organise, that we're going to bring in, where we're expecting 200 to 400 people to come, where we're running the whole live streaming, etc., etc. So all of these engagements are happening. Then, of course, we gather an enormous amount of information. The core team gets together along with any decision makers that would like to. We then discern patterns from all of the engagements we've done, pull out clear themes. Those clear themes then start influencing design, and then we do a launch event of the building based upon the public input, right? So that's the kind of a model that we're kind of experimenting with at the moment, and I fully expect it to change as we get into it. I fully expect it to change as we get into it. This is like version number 1. The foundation retreat happens October 15th, right? Which makes me want to go straight to. You guys are more interested in this kind of stuff, I think. So the way that we're working then is that so there's engagement that takes place, right? There's engagement that takes place. So we go out and we go and gather information from the public, and the elements of engagement for us are events-based. There's events that happen that are participatory, where we're working with participatory processes like World Cafe, and open space technology, and appreciative inquiry, and all of these different methodologies, future search. I mean, there's so many of them now. You can design your own if you understand the fundamental architecture, right? So those, we've got events, we've got online engagement. So we're working, like conversations happening online in social media anyway, so you might as well start hosting that. You might as well start creating platforms for that. And not only that, there's media trawlers now that can go through social media and discern themes. Right? So if you've got your hashtags in place, you can trawl your hashtags and start seeing patterns of public opinion. Alright? And then the other piece that we're doing is creative engagement, so street level engagement. Right? So that's our engagement. We're going out and we're finding people. There's a platform that we're working with where we're making visible everything we discover, we make it visible. There's absolutely transparency. We don't mess with the words of any of it. Right? We'll pull out themes, and then we'll have listed underneath the exact words of the things that we've copied. Right? So there's absolute when we run an event, we pattern discern in the room. People are writing things down from the table conversations they're in on post-its, and they go up on the wall, and they're like clustered into themes along a wall, and then before people leave, we're like, here are the key themes that have come out of this event. So you can hold us accountable, and it's live streamed too. Right? So we're not taking the information, messing with it afterwards, and then bringing it back, which nobody trusts. Right? So there's a platform. So we work with websites here, so we're looking at websites to make visible information. There's videos on there, there's Twitter streams on there, there's information on the sites, there's information on the developments. I'll show you one later. And then, of course, once you've got all this information and you're making it visible, the question is, how are you feeding that back out into the public realm so it can continue to inform and transform the public conversation? And how are you getting that back onto the desks of decision makers so it can start influencing how decisions get made? Like, these are the 3 things that we're constantly moving through. Engagement, making it visible, messaging it out. Right? That's like the basic movement of all of our work. And yeah, so that's what it looks like when I'm doing like a fancy presentation to a load of decision makers. Here we go, here's my fancy slide. Right? Not really that fancy, but there you go. And so there's an engagement process, there's a core team that is holding it all together. There's often a steering committee of decision makers who are tracking and keeping informed as we move through it. And yeah, you can have a look at all of these in your own leisure. And so the elements, so I've talked about that, there's events, creative and online. And I think I've got some, yeah, so here you go. Here's some of the creative stuff that we're talking about, right? So it's like taking cording and turning it into chalkboards. Candy Chang's coming into town soon. Have you guys bumped into Candy Chang's work? Amazing, this like participatory artist, who's basically using art to engage people. Not everybody likes coming to events. Some people hate coming to events. You have to go out and meet them on the street. I told this story at the Art of Hosting like 4 times. When we were starting the youth centre down in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, and it was the highest rate of teenage pregnancy in all of Canada was in this community of 9,000 people. And so the government was turning up and trying to do all kinds of engagement with youth. And they were doing it in the Rod Grand Hotel. you know. And like not a single kid from our community had ever been in the Rod Ranford Lab. But that's where they were running their engagement. So I turned up, two of my kids, and they were like, why are no kids here? I was like, because they're 200 yards down the road, outside the coffee shop, where they are every single day. All you would have to do is go down there, you know. So the purpose of creative engagement is to go meet people where they're at. Go meet people where they're at. Don't expect them to come to your events, you know. They don't even know you. They don't even trust you. Why should they come to your event? You know what I mean? So it's like, go find people, and then do something interesting. Do something memorable. Do something worthwhile. Like participatory theatre, you know, there's a whole body of work. Augusto Boal's work around theatre of the oppressed, you know. Like incredible street engagement work, right? Candy Chang's work of like, you know, chalk stencils that you're spraying down. Tree here. You know, park bench here. I mean, there's so much. We have musicians playing. We had a local artist create a cardboard pop-up situation where we would pull up in the car, we'd open the trunk of the car, we'd unfold like cardboard chairs, we'd unfold like a cardboard backdrop, musicians would suddenly get out of the car, they start playing tunes, you know, and then we've got an artist drawing on the backdrop, and we've got people interviewing public about what they would like to see in the building, and that's being captured by the artist on the backdrop, you know, and they called them pop-up engagements. This is a great little organisation in Halifax run by some buddies of mine called CoLab. And that's what they focus on now, you know. There's a whole global field around placemaking, which is just, I mean, the thing for me is that people get tripped out and think placemaking is the answer. Or they think participatory events are the answer. Or they think online engagement is the answer. And for me it's like, no, all of that, you know, people engage in different ways, and you have to be able to meet them where they're at, right? So this stuff works because it becomes, it not only allows you to gather information, it allows you to make invitation face to face. And you know what? We're doing an event on October the 23rd, and it'll be great to see you there. Oh, that's completely different than getting a PDF. Completely different. Right? A human has invited you. This one down the bottom's cool. We went out with some huge yellow speech bubbles, and then we would interview people. This was around an open spaces plan. The government wanted to know where they should be investing their money in terms of the development of public open spaces across a whole region called Cole Harbour. And we went out and we interviewed people with these bubbles, and then we took down what they said, and then it went up on a website. I think I have a picture of it. It went up on a website, and then we put the text of what they said into the speech bubble on a picture on the website. Then you could go on a Google map, and you could see everywhere that we've gone out and interviewed people, and you could just click on it, and that person would come up with what they would like in the open space in the speech bubble, you know? So there's just all kinds of ways that you can be using technology to make the engagement fun and interesting. Events, obviously, participatory events. You want, I mean, you know, we have music there. I mean, events, the thing about any kind of engagement is that you're making an intervention into a community. You're making an intervention into a community. And if you don't have an understanding that you're doing that, you're going to act unconsciously. You know? So if what you're doing doesn't raise people's pride of place, if what you're doing doesn't give people a sense of like, holy crap, I am from here. Look at this, I love it. If you're running an event that undermines people's sense of confidence in their home, you shouldn't be running events as far as I'm concerned. You know, like every event you run is an intervention into a community. All right? So when we're running events, like we have local musicians, we have local artists, we have local, I mean, we're just like, it's real, there's things to touch. We were doing an engagement around roundabouts. For some reason, people in the city of Halifax hate roundabouts, even though all the evidence is like roundabouts are a good idea. They're just totally attached to four-way stops. So when people came in the room, they couldn't get into the room without navigating the roundabout. So they had to like go and like, no, people go. So it's like, how does it actually become an experience of what you're engaging people around, right? So, and obviously, you know, sometimes we're working, like I was telling you about those concentric circles, where we have spaces for people to speak in the middle. Sometimes we're working with processes like World Cafe. We've always got space for kids, so that parents can come. We've always got tables where people can come and they can leave their kids. We have the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, runs kids programs generally during our engagements. We've usually got artists there, we have speakers. So obviously, one piece of engagement is engaging the public. Another piece of engagement is expert input. Right? So with the libraries project, for example, Morten Schmidt, this like Danish architect, got up on stage, you know, he was hilarious because he had like these super tight leather trousers, and he was great. He was the perfect architect for the job. And everyone was just like, whoa, look at this guy. And but he was like he was good in a room. He was charming in front of a room, and that really helped. You know, like an architect who stands up on stage and speaks in a monotone is like hard to work with, you know. So anyway, so he was great. So he stood up and he basically said, here are all the libraries across the world that are inspiring me. Here is where I think libraries are going. Libraries are no longer about books, they're hubs of community. And he just built this vision, this like sense of like, what's the global transition in libraries in urban centres, you know? And that completely changed the public dialogue, because people were informed, right? They were informed about where things were going, you know? Sometimes there's technical information that the public need to know before they can have a good conversation. So it's not that, I mean, you know, sometimes in public engagement people start thinking that experts are anathema, or they're like it's the worst thing that can happen. It's like, no, experts are essential to informing good public conversation. Essential, right? So speakers, music, things people can touch, bricks they can handle, materials they can play with, like pictures they can look at, like all of that has to be part of it. Great. And then this is the kind of online stuff. So we always live stream our events, so people who can't make it at the time can watch. You know, we're generally using websites as the kind of places where people can go and see a repository of information. They can see the outputs of events and things like that. You know, we're working with Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and all of that, just because it's where conversations happen anyway. And at the moment, we're building a website for each engagement. And that's like not cost effective, it's not a good way of doing it. We just haven't found an online platform that supports our work in any way. So we're just considering like how on earth are we going to build like an online platform that's able to aggregate public opinion from across multiple different forms of media and different events. So we're trying to figure that out. There's someone's done it. Have you done it?
No.
Oh, damn.
Different question.
Yeah.
How do you pay for this? How much does it cost?
It ranges. It ranges. So something like the Coal Harbour project, we did for like $15,000. You know, big engagement, and because the guy who invited us, Peter Bigelow, called us up and was like, "This is going to be awesome. Let's do it. We can really set a precedent." You know, the Nova Centre project, you know, it was under $100,000 that we did the whole thing for, and that was like 13 engagements across all of the province of Nova Scotia. It was a website build. And
Did the government pay for it?
The government split that 50-50 with the developer. So it ranges, you know, and to be honest, like it ranges partly based upon the scale of the work and partly upon the passion that me and my team have for it. There's some stuff that we'll just do for free because we love it and we love the person inviting us, you know. And there's some stuff that like I don't know, you know, and I need to pay my rent and look after my kids and stuff like that. So that's part of it too. But there's not, you know, I don't have like a fixed financial model, but like the kind of basic principle that I work with, not just for the civic engagement work, but for any work I'm involved in the world, is you know, pay what you can and a little bit more. And so when someone comes to me and says, "Would you come and do a piece of work?" generally I'll give them my absolute top-end price, and then I'll be like, "This is just so you know, if I was working for a major international corporate or a large governmental system, this is what I would be charging you. And then you just let me know what you can pay, and add a little bit more on that, and then we'll do the work together. Because by the time we've got to money, you know, they've got me. You know what I mean? I'm already committed because we're in a, you know what I mean? We've had enough of a long conversation that like, they absolutely have my attention. Yeah? And the little bit more isn't about me being greedy, it's about me wanting them to feel like it's a commitment. Yeah? So I'm not interested in people feeling like they're getting something easy. You know, it should feel like, oh, I'm making a commitment. And the finances is just part of that feeling of commitment. I'm not asking you to come into a nice, tightly run process where everything runs smoothly. I'm asking you to come into an inherently chaotic process where you know, civic engagement is inherently chaotic. You never know what's going to happen, ever. You know, you've got 400 people coming into a room. You're engaging people on the street. You've got open comment boards. You've got it's chaotic. You know, so all you're asking is what's the minimum order that I can put in place so that all of this chaos can actually evolve meaningfully and usefully for